Hi, folks. Steve Urban here. Today's episode of the Riderflex podcast is sponsored by Marketing 360. My good friend JB Kellogg and his team do such a fantastic job for us and so many other companies. Marketing 360 is the number one platform for small business, and it's everything you need to grow your business. If you need marketing support, I really encourage you to contact them at marketing360.com/riderflex, and we'll add that link to the description of this episode for easy reference. And on today's episode of the Riderflex podcast, we have guest Damayanti Dipayana. She is the co-founder and CEO of Manatee, a digital platform that empowers mental health providers and families by integrating therapy into daily life. Dama Dipayana on the Riderflex podcast.
Yeah.
How you doing, Dama?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being on the show. I studied you the last couple of days getting ready for the podcast. Interesting story. Looks like you're doing some cool things with Manatee. I always respect people that have the guts to step away from a regular job and start their own business. Before we get into the business part, tell us about you personally for the listeners. Give us a nice Dama overview, where you grew up, family, things like that.
Sure. I grew up in the Netherlands in a city called The Hague. It's beautiful but boring. It's where the government is. It's at sea. It's wonderful. I went to university in London, studied international business and global banking. I have an amazing family. I guess I'm biased because it's my family, but I am married with a husband and I have 2 young kids. Third is on the way. So we're busy and it's really exciting that everyone's at home. Like genuinely, yes, it's kind of crazy, but it's also nice that the whole family's together. So I have one 3-year-old turning 4 in December and one who almost turned 2. So they'll all be very close together.
Wow, it's busy at your house. So you got 2 toddlers, basically, one on the way, and you decided to start a company.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit busy at your place. Tell us about your early career before we get into Manatee. So after school, walk us through some of the things you did, and then kind of transition into how you decided to move away from being an employee and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I think I always have been super independent. And I think that was kind of like the foundation for starting my own business. I never thought about like, ooh, I want to become an entrepreneur. Like that was never a thing that I considered or thought about. But I was really young. Like when I was 11, I already had a job and I made my own money. When I was 15, I went to
Really?
Greece for a whole summer to work. I just really liked the independence. If I wanted to buy new jeans, then I want to be able to buy new jeans, whether I was 14 or, whatever. So I always had that. So I guess my early career was like, and I love working hard. I don't know. I spent I want to say my 15 up until 18 years, I probably worked outside of like school and stuff. I worked 5 nights a week.
Wow.
I
Okay.
made a lot of money like behind bars and tips, and it was like my favorite thing to do. Weirdly enough, I also had friends. I promise.
So the work ethic was always there, but not necessarily an entrepreneurial bug. You didn't have that back then. Okay. What's your folks
No,
do? What's your parents do, if you don't mind me asking?
yeah. So my dad always traded stocks and everything. So he's basically a professional gambler. I don't know how else you want to put him on running the financial market. And my mom actually is uh, probably the one who inspired me. Like she always worked in sales, but she runs like big tenders. So she worked for big tech companies from, Dell in the early days to, and then she ran procurement for like ING Bank. So she did both sides of the table, but she's always worked in sales and technology.
Okay, gotcha. All right. I was just curious as to, the work ethic and the entrepreneurial stuff. I'm always curious as to whether or not that comes from the parents or how they guided you. So So when you got out of school, did you know what you wanted to be? Did you know what you wanted to do? Yeah, go ahead. What was the plan?
I mean, I don't think, I think, I want to preface this with, I think growing up in the Netherlands is so different versus growing up in
Mm.
the US.
Tell me, give me some details.
I think the academic pressure that kids have in the US is really insane, personally.
Oh,
I think that there's a real combination of like education being so expensive and actually education being really important, where, and there's a lot of variability within education in the US, whereby if you don't go to a good school, that actually will impact your future income. But it's unfortunate that that future income is also tied with the current income that you have, because if you don't have money, you can't go to a good school. Now, that means that kids are really pressured into academic performance. So scores and tests and all of those things, and your extracurricular activities are super important. So you hopefully can get a scholarship or get into a good school.
mm,
Now, on the flip side, in the Netherlands, I mean, I love being Dutch, but I think everything is much more like of the ground. So every school is pretty good. Is it a Harvard or a Yale? Probably not. But is it just good, solid education? Yes.
mm.
It's cheap. You don't have to pay for it. So that means that, I guess, throughout the whole process, there's just like nobody really, I think just in general, kids don't really know what they want to do, because that's a really daunting question. But
Yeah,
we, at least in the Netherlands, have a little bit more luxury to figure it out, because the impact is not as big. It's not like
I
your
see.
tuition is $50,000, and it's not like if you don't do this, then you may not get a job and therefore are on the street, because
Right.
you know there's no social system either. So I think because of that, point being, to answer your question, no, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Also, I took a lot of time, and I think that's very different. That's a luxury that I think a lot of young people in the US just unfortunately don't have. So I was 17 when I graduated high school. I got into med school, realized that that was not what I wanted to do.
Oh, really? Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, you were
Yes,
thinking you might want to be a doctor, maybe at some point.
I really wanted to become a reconstructive plastic surgeon. So I wanted
Wow.
to
O-
focus on like birth defects and stuff like that and accidents. But
Okay.
like that's a really long road. And as a 17-year-old, I just couldn't commit to that. Then I took 2 years off and traveled the world,
Okay.
like lived in Sri Lanka, Thailand, taught skiing, snowboarding in Switzerland, like literally just
Cool.
did nothing for 2 years, like lived
Great.
with a backpack in the jungle of Sri Lanka. And again, like
Mm,
I know that that's a luxury that most kids probably don't have, but ultimately it's also really cheap. Like I think I
wow.
spend maybe $500 a month, you know. So at the same time, but
Love it.
anyway, so that's what I did. And then my mom basically said like, cool, so you've done 2 years of traveling, you have to now just do something. So that something for me was like international business. Sounds like you can do business. So so
That's
that
great.
so that's what I went with. And I wasn't really passionate about economics or accounting, but
Uh, uh,
it was
what,
it was an education.
what was your skill? Was your skill set people, relations, sales, marketing? Like, what did you start to fancy yourself as? A relationship person, a salesperson, a marketing person? How were you bucketing yourself?
I honestly don't think I know. I don't know.
Uh,
I knew what I liked. So the thing is, I really, growing up, I really liked science and biology, and like that's also like in the Netherlands, high school slightly different. Like you have to choose a direction, and my direction was biology and science.
I
So
see.
then your high school subjects are also math, science, biology. So I really love that. So I don't think that there was. I kind of like global banking. I like economics. I like kind of how markets work, and I like technology. I hated
Okay.
accounting. I was very bad at that. But yeah, I would say like more that direction. I like technology, and I think that's also what ended up like what put me in my first job and ultimately really liking working for
and
tech.
Gotcha. And the longest career at any one company you had before you started Manatee was Qubit, right? I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
correct.
what was your function there? Were you relations? Were you strategy? Were you sales? What were you doing there primarily?
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to say that I owe Cubit so much. Like
Mm,
I grew up with that company. So I would say I mean, we all started like figuring it out. It's one of like their kind of early stage first, like non-technical hires.
okay.
We had like a dev team and they were trying to figure out like their professional services and account management team.
I
So I was
see.
actually the first that was hired to ultimately, once we signed the client, to figure out what to do with them and support them and run the project. So how that evolved fast forward was actually building out teams when we expanded into the US. So I went from actually like being somewhat junior. I had a bunch of jobs before that and I worked in fintech and like sure I was a project manager, but I feel like that really established me where I felt I was the first time like a manager and all of a sudden I was responsible for people. So I grew a lot in that time span. And then we closed our Series A, and I moved to New York to build out our professional services and customer success teams in the US.
Ah,
And then we grew significantly with, our Series B or Series C. Like, I mean, we actually matured from kind of a startup where you just do everything and there's not that much
y-
discipline around stuff to like an actual company.
and were you early enough as an employee that you got equity before they started? Did you get a payday there? Can you share that or no?
I mean, I wish we're still in the process, but I think we raised significant amount of money, so we'll have to see how it
Okay.
pans out. But we
They
haven't
haven't.
had a liquidation
Oh,
event
oh,
yet.
I see. I see. No event yet. Okay.
But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I
Okay.
believe in the team.
Sounds like you had a great career there and you helped them build it. Great experience. What happened? When did the entrepreneurial bug happen for you? Walk us into the transition when you decided to leave there.
Yeah, I mean, I I left because felt I left on really good terms. I had a pretty big, so we went through restructuring, and I think any entrepreneur, I mean, if you're that as lucky as getting, or actually, I shouldn't say lucky because there's a lot of hard work involved too.
Yeah.
But if you are part of the very few that gets to growth stage, like you will see that you go from significant growth to all of a sudden now you have to be profitable and gross margin and all of those very different metrics become important. Point being, it's like we went through a really big restructuring and I led a lot of the efforts to get to gross margin neutral. And after that project, I just felt that my time had come. Like I'd given everything to the company and I felt that there was nowhere for me to go or grow within the
Okay.
organization. So
Okay.
that was kind of, I felt like I ended in a really good spot. And I was like, I've given it everything and now someone else can take it over to the next stage. So that was kind of my closing from that company. And then I actually didn't think at all. I mean, I kind of thought it was like at sometimes starting my own business, but I really was just looking at other jobs. I wanted to take some time off to figure out what I really wanted to do in my career. And I got to that point where like career progression just wasn't that important. Like I had a really good salary. Like I had a really big team. Like, I thought I ticked all the boxes that you want to tick to just like, I want to be successful.
Yeah.
So then I was like, but what do I actually want to do? And I looked at jobs and I just couldn't find a job that I like. I would be in interviews and I was like, oh my God, this sounds awful. Or like, oh my God, I don't want to work for this company or I don't want to work in this team. Or like I couldn't, I honestly like would objectively interview in like really awesome positions and I couldn't get excited about them. And I think that was the moment when I
That's it.
realized like
Yep.
I don't think I can get excited about working for anyone else anymore. I think that was when I had that realization,
Mm,
like I don't want to work for anyone but myself.
yep.
And that's when I started really thinking about starting my own business.
Okay. All right. Very good. And then you said, okay, well, I know I don't want to work for anybody else, but I have no idea what I want to do. Well, let me come up with some business ideas. How did you come up? Now, you're also the co-founder of Be Frank, right? Which I think is still in existence.
Mhm.
So, yeah, how did that happen? And go ahead.
I really wanted to be part. This Me Too movement started in LA, and I really wanted to be part of the conversation because I felt at that time it was not balanced yet. It was really the perspective of women, which, granted, I'm a woman myself. I 100,000% support that, of course. But if there's one thing that I learned, to have a productive resolution of conflict, you need to have both parties at the table having a dialogue. And I felt that was really missing. So the first thing that we did, I was like, it would be really interesting if we could just ask random guys about how they feel about this and what their perspective is. And I really want to explore also kind of how intimate relationships between men and women are shaped, and especially like the gender dichotomy that you have in the US, where my perspective in the Netherlands is, I mean, are genders equal? Probably not, but we're very close to that. And I felt relationships are very different, so sexual assault and all of those things, in the way that we talk about sex is very different. So I felt like a lot of those underlying things that we actually didn't talk about weren't discussed. So I really want to understand the male perspective of, how do you learn about sex? Where do you learn from it? Like, how do you have a sexual relationship with a woman? Like, how do you feel about this? And I think the more we explored that, the more we realized that there was just a really big gap in the way that people had open dialogue. And that's where Be Frank stemmed from. So we started with that video, and then we started producing more and more videos that really explored this like tough conversations that needed to have an open dialogue. So we did one on like racial inequality, we did like on mental health. So we're exploring a bunch of other ones that are really, really interesting.
And early on, was it a hobby, or did you immediately set a business model to create marketing dollars and things like that?
I honestly, I don't think I ever really thought of it as like a scalable business. I
Okay.
thought of it very much as I mean, also not to say that a production company is not a scalable business. It's just not necessarily going to be VC backable. So I always thought of it as in like, I want to set this up. I think it deserves a place in the world, but I really handed it over to my partner, who is, an award-winning documentary filmmaker who knows everything around production. So she runs it, and I am just here to support, basically. So I knew that was going to be the transition of the company.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, and while you were doing that, were you thinking of Manatee? And talk to us about how that came about, because I think wasn't Manatee founded late 2018, I think? Okay.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it. I just couldn't really crack the problem yet, because it was very big. So I knew that I wanted to do something in mental and behavioral health for families and children, but that's such a broad issue. Sorry, Steve, you want to say something?
Well, why did you know you wanted to do that? Where's the connection there for you personally?
Oh, my brother grew up with a bunch of mental behavioral issues. So
I see.
And I felt it was a really big problem regardless. And I had I was pregnant with my second kid by then. So it was also just a topic that I became much more into and passionate about.
Okay, gotcha. I was wondering where the emotional tieback was and how that came about. Okay, so you knew you wanted to do something. All right, go ahead. Sorry, I broke your flow.
No, all good. And then I think the next step was, I'm like, all right, cool. So I know but I actually had something that's called a spark file. So I really believe, like, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that actually deters people from starting a business is they think like, oh, you have to have this $1 million idea. And that's not at all how businesses work. Like, there's a reason why an idea, I mean, ideas are useless. Literally, there's a reason why there's not a market for ideas. It's because they're not valuable. If there would be if there be value to ideas, there'd be a market for it, and there's not. So point being is that's not how it works. I always believed in having a spark file, meaning I would write down things that just sounded interesting to me. I'm like, like I would look at an industry as like, that feels antiquated, or like, ooh, there's something happening in that technology space. So I would just write down literally, like I still have that file, still put notes in there. And it ranges from, I really feel like there are components of the educational system broken. I'm like, ooh, what about like sanitary issues, and like what about like portable toilets in India? Like I would just chuck down anything and everything in there. And then over time, like ideas that seem to have legs because of external stuff
Yep.
often, like new technologies coming about or like regulatory pieces changing, like they kind of start forming. And for me, when it came to mental behavioral health, for me, it was really like the adoption of technology, but also mental health becoming like a big conversation within, like, it felt like it was time for people to actually properly address it. And I think it also was time where people felt comfortable using technology to address it. So for me, those two things made it real, like a real business opportunity. And then I just looked in the market and realized that there was not that much there at all for pediatric mental and behavioral health care. So those components made it just kind of grow. But anyone who's aspiring to do something, my suggestion would just be like noodle on an idea for like a while. Like it takes often,
Mm-hmm.
and also know that you're going to pivot probably 3 times.
Yeah.
So
I think that's great advice that you shared. If you are an aspiring entrepreneur and you don't have a specific idea yet, but you know that you want to do your own thing, and I think there's a lot of listeners out there that will probably listen to this episode, and they're exactly like that. They know they don't want to work for somebody, but they don't really have an idea yet. What Dama just said, just start writing down ideas. Start keeping a log. Start keeping a journal, and the picture will probably unfold, and then eventually it'll probably tie back to something personal and that you're passionate about, and then it'll start to become clear. I think that's really great story,
mhm.
great advice. Okay, so and then when you finally did kind of decide on pediatric mental health type things, did you started to look to see if there was competition or somebody else doing it? Couldn't find anything, nobody doing it?
Yeah, I felt that there were interesting players in the space, but there was no one who thought about it the same way I did.
Okay.
So, yeah, and also like competition is not necessarily a bad thing. I think
Right.
they're like I would say like if you start fundraising and there's no one out there who's doing what you're doing, like that is going to be a red flag. So, um,
Uh,
but I felt that there was a really solid wedge in the market, that there was space for a company to really like own that niche and then expand from there.
Very good. Okay, now, did you want it to be an app, or did that just happen for you over time? You're like, I want this to be like an app. I want them to use it on the phone. Did that kind of developed for you as you thought through it?
I I wanted it to be technology enabled. So
Okay.
I felt that it needs to be a digital platform.
Okay.
And then obviously the most obvious thing to reach families is a mobile device. And then for us, for clinicians, it's a desktop. So it's
I
also
see.
web
I
app.
see. I see. Okay. Very good. Why don't you give us, tell people, give us the Manatee overview as it stands today, and then I want to hit you with some questions, a few more questions on how you bootstrapped it and all that. But let's just go ahead and give the listeners an overview right now. Tell them about Manatee. Go for it.
Mm. Yeah. So ultimately, the big problem that I found with therapy today is that we don't support families or children, the 99% that they're not in therapy session. So how do you do that? So we really focused first on building a platform that enables therapists to set treatment goals, just like how we all set goals in our business. Like you have a session, you set goals in that session. These are the things that we're going to work on. That does two things. It creates accountability for the parents, keeps them involved. They're like, okay, cool, this is what I'm paying for. Like there's progress here.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it also really empowers the child to, take ownership over their destiny, to get directive
Mhm.
support, to know what they need to work on. So all in all, that focuses on a bunch of things when it comes to improved outcomes, when it comes to actual ROI pieces for the provider. So that was the first thing. It's like, how do you translate what we're working on in therapy and make it part of the day-to-day? Now, that platform does awesome. Providers use it. We're used by pediatric hospitals. But the big vision of Manatee always has been, how do you create this digital behavioral health hub for families and children. So how do we actually, from the bottom up, reimagine what therapy and mental health support looks like for families, whereby parents and families are empowered and supported so they know how to support their children with, additional special needs. But at the same time, it's technology enabled. There's so many things you can't do in an analog world. So it's like data driven. We focus on progress that's been made. We can gamify stuff. We can make it fun for kids. Because if you think about it, no kid wants to sit in a room to talk about their feelings for an hour once every week.
No.
With a stranger. Don't get me wrong, you have incredibly amazing psychologists and therapists who are so good at their job, but if you fundamentally look at that model, that's not actually how children feel best supported.
Gotcha. Now, is your customer, your revenue comes from families that sign up or from hospitals that suggest to families to use it, or both? What's the business model?
So the business model is a straightforward SaaS model. So we sell directly into health systems, so hospitals, community mental health centers, etc. They implement the platform, and then every family who enrolls in their services will use the platform to basically track progress and get their treatment plan.
I see. And does the family have to pay for it, or the family's already paying the hospital a certain fee overall, and this is part of their service they provide? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the family doesn't pay any additional fees.
I see. Okay. And you're selling to major healthcare companies. Who are some of the big fish that you've landed so far? Can you name some of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are actually part of the digital health lab at Children's Hospital LA, which is one of the largest pediatric hospitals. So that's a big pediatric hospital. And then we're also, piloting and working closely together with, the largest community mental health center here in Colorado. There's a bunch of other pediatric hospitals that we work with. So yes.
And when you got your first big client was in LA. First big hospital was in LA. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah. The first big hospital was in LA. First client was in Colorado.
Okay. Tell me about that first deal you got signed. Was that you? Like weeks of meetings? How did you convince them? Like, hey, I know you're not using anything like this, but because I know that had to feel pretty good. Getting the first big contract, was that your proof of concept where you said, wow, okay, we just signed a contract and somebody's actually going to pay us for this product?
Yeah, it's a very weird feeling when somebody values what you feel, what was literally in your head, that they're now willing to spend money on. That's it's a feeling that at least I hadn't really experienced that much before. I don't know about other people, but that was a new thing for me. Yeah, I think for me, selling is just, it comes down to empathy, understanding what pain you're solving for them, and that's what you're solving. And that's ultimately, so for me also, when I think about building our product and building our platform, it's not that we build stuff because we're like, oh, that sounds cool, but it's literally, we figure out at every single point, what's your problem? What's your pain point? What's the challenge? And then you think about, how do we solve that? So I think if you solve a big enough problem, people will pay for it.
I love that.
Necessarily weeks of no, you're just hey, what's your problem? Cool. Also, even when we started the business, I didn't build this platform just because I thought it was going to be a good platform. I really we built a demo that was solely based on feedback from providers, and then we iterated based on that, and then we launched it based on therapy. What do you want to solve?
I see. From the time you filed the LLC, from the time you filed for the company until you got your first check for revenue, what was that? A year? 6 months? 2 years?
So I actually incorporated really early. I don't know why, but I felt like that was an important step for me when there was actually nothing there. So I want to say I filed in 2018.
Okay.
In say July,
Okay.
And then I was just noodling on the idea, doing market research, like all of that stuff. And then I met my co-founder, who's amazing, in, I want to say, end of 2018. It took me probably 5 months to convince him to quit his job because he had a really good job. He was like an engineering lead for this awesome tech company. And like convincing a co-founder, like, hey, you should now become unemployed with me on this idea that is not proven at all. That's a hard thing to do. But
All right. Yeah.
for me, that was March 2019. And I think that was the moment when we actually could build something.
Okay.
And from March 2019 to our first contract, and that was August 2019.
That's
So
pretty
it's
still.
8
That's
months.
pretty fast. That's pretty fast. So what I heard you say there was you made sure you signed on a co-founder that was a tech person. So you were sales and marketing and relations, and you signed on somebody to handle the coding and the tech piece. Was that the relationship?
I mean, I think that doesn't have to be the relationship, but I think the founding team needs to be able to get whatever you're trying to do to market.
Okay.
So
Right.
if that's a technical product and you're not technical, you should have a technical co-founder. You have sometimes single founders who can outsource it, but I think that's harder to do.
Now, some of the listeners are going to say to themselves, well, how did she eat and pay the bills? And how did the other guy just quit his job and had no income for 6 months? And what would you guys have, a bunch of savings? Did you get some seed money from friends and family? How did you fund it?
Yeah, so I think that's super personal for everyone, like how to figure that out. I will say there are a bunch of ways that you can do this. One, you don't have to quit your jobs. You can do a side gig. You just need to be willing to work hard. Like
Right.
it's the thing is, it's like it's all about priorities, right? Like, is that what you want? I also want to say, like, starting a business is really awful, like really awful. I would actually, unless you are 1,000% sure and kind of borderline insane, I would just say, like, it's much harder than I thought it would be. So,
So,
but that aside, I think first, you know, smart founders, will do it like on the side, like
yeah.
figure things out. Like you don't have to quit your job. Like keep that security. Once you have some more conviction, you can choose to quit your job or not. I think in terms of like what I actually did, I did consulting gigs on the side. So
Okay.
I would get like, I would get like a 20K consulting gig, and that would keep me running for a little while. Also because I didn't want to work full time for another boss, as I mentioned. So that was my perspective. But so like, I think you can either keep it as a side gig, you can, do some consulting projects on the side to kind of like keep going. But the best thing is honestly just to get revenue as early as possible and like force you to do that, get to that point.
Right. So you
Like
and your
ship really early, like
Yeah.
get stuff out the door and see if people will pay for it.
I think that's great advice. Yeah, that's another mistake I think people make is they think it has to be perfect, and that whatever it is they're building has to be absolutely perfect before it, quote, goes to market. Yeah, that's not true. You need to get some revenue, try to get some proof of concept, see if anybody's even interested. You can always pivot and change and tweak as you move along. I totally agree. Now, your co-founder, did you say so were you guys like just, hey, sweat equity? You neither one of us are going to get paid. Here's how we're going to divvy up the equity, and it's all sweat equity? Or did you guys also put in some your own cash to survive, or a combination of both? Probably.
Yeah, it was a combination of both. But we also got invested, like we were funded by Techstars really early on. So July,
Oh.
Techstars, we were funded by Techstars. So they put in 120 and 25. So they put in 145K, which obviously helped us run it for a little while.
Now, can you talk about that for a little bit for people that don't know what Techstars is? Can you just give a short, brief story on what did you look up Techstars in LA and say, hey, I want to come to a meeting? Give us the short version.
The short version is Techstars is an accelerator. There are 1 million accelerators. They're not all made equal. The kind of like the big two are like Techstars versus YC.
Yeah.
You can look up the philosophical differences. But anyway, an accelerator's purpose is what the name suggests, to accelerate your business. They invest a small
Pre-seed.
convertible note or
Yeah.
save. Like
Yeah.
they get a bunch of equity in return, but you get like a 3-month program, usually whatever, a program in which you get a lot of mentorship, guidance, structure, and discipline to actually get to the next milestone, which in most cases for companies are raising their fees or getting to commercialization or something along those lines. That's what Techstars is, or what accelerators are. Again, like there's so many now. I would really investigate before you just jump the gun on going into a program, and figure out what you want to get out of the program, and then how to get into the program. I mean, I think the best advice that I can give is ultimately people are people, and there's a lot of risk involved in startups. Know that the business you're pitching, any investor has probably heard 8,000 times. Like there's nothing really special about it. What's special is like your ability to execute. So if you want to get into anything, whether it's getting into an accelerator, whether it's getting funded, I think a lot more value and weight is put not on the idea, but on your ability to show that what you're saying you're going to do, you're actually going to do. So if you want to get in, start the conversation 3 months before and show, or 6 months before, whatever. Find who is important in that decision-making process and just show them, hey, I did this. Oh, I want to give you an update on that. And then they start tracking like this line, and they start believing like, this person can at least execute on what they're saying. And I think that's most important for very early stage investors or accelerators, because there's really not that much data besides the team and your execution ability.
Really good advice. Was it worth giving up that early equity? Would you do it again?
Yeah, I also would. I feel like my MD Anna would be really upset with me if I said no. But honestly, like I think I think it really depends on what you want to get out of it. I know some founders who are like disgruntled about it. I know some founders who say it's life-changing, and I know anywhere in between.
Yeah.
The point is, what you get out is what you put in. So if you're gonna do it, just do it properly, and I assure you it will pay itself back in tenfold.
Are you guys cash flow positive now, or are you still kind of at a burn and you're raising some more cash, or how much can you share?
Mm-hmm. So we're actually kind of closing our seed round, so we'll see. So we're in like the final stages of raising our seed round. It's kind of crazy times to raise money.
Right.
But we are, we are generating revenue. We have like a good MRR that's growing, and that we focus on, but we certainly need some cash to kind of take ownership over the opportunity that's ahead.
Do you find the cash raise piece of it a pain in the ass, or you enjoy that challenge, or where does that rank among all of the other things that you have to do as the CEO?
I mean, if you can build a business without raising money, you should.
Gotcha.
That's the short answer. The longer answer is that is not always possible. And I think just with anything in the business, there are ups and downs. Like there are moments when I think if you're going to go down the route of fundraising, you have to know it's really hard. It's really painful. You're gonna I think I have 89 funds who said no, like truly.
Wow.
And I mean, you can't take it personal. Like you can't. That's not like, that's the name of the game. The majority of funds will say no. And you have to, but at the same time, it's an incredible learning opportunity. I think it's very rare that you will have moments in your career, your professional career, that you get to pitch and sell the dream to really smart people, generally really smart people who will really ask hard questions and will nitpick it and will pull it apart. And if you don't use it as a learning opportunity, I think that's, just a waste of time. So just know when you're going into it, it's going to be really hard. You're going to get a lot of no's. You can't take it personal, but use it as a learning opportunity and take those data points to refine your story, to think through the risks in your business, to like close those gaps. Because most of the time, our investors always right no. Like there are plenty of investors who said no to Google or
Right.
Airbnb or like, you know, like they don't have a, you know, a glass bowl or like a
Yep.
crystal ball on their desk.
Yep. Yep.
They're human, but they are really smart and they will help you think through really important components of your business.
Really good advice. How many employees now, or what's the team size as of today?
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Five, and then when you get your series, you raise your next round here. You're going to double or something, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll add some more people for this year.
What's been the scariest moment for you so far? What have you had one of those moments where you just your husband you're at it's late at night, you're having a glass of wine, and you're just like, oh Jesus, I don't know if I can do this.
I mean, all the time. Honestly, like I don't think that a day goes by that I don't doubt what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
and that's true for most entrepreneurs, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it ranges. Like I think one thing that I know that I'm grateful that I have this. I'm actually really like big on positive self-talk. So it's very rare that I'm like down on myself, but it's a combination of like, is it where like because we're also tackling a really big problem that feels really big and scary. Like what keeps me up at night is like, what if I'm building this and actually it doesn't make a difference? Like it doesn't actually help families. I think that's one that kind of like keeps me up at night. And for like sometimes like this is not gonna work. Like this fundraiser is not gonna close. Like this is a dumb idea. Like I might not be the right person. Like there's just a million things that you will have doubts about. But you know, I think it's not about the absence of fear. It's about working through it.
Right. Any last pieces of advice for the aspiring entrepreneur who hasn't quit their job and taken the leap, but they really want to? What would you tell them?
Well, I think now is an interesting time that makes people more fearful, but I would say in every time of difficulty is also lots of opportunity.
Mm.
So I wouldn't let that deter you. The only thing that I would honestly ask anyone who wants to start a business is why.
Why?
I think that's a really important question to just ask yourself, because things will get really hard. And when you start thinking about building your team and building a co-found or like, you know, building a small founding team, it's like you have to be on the same page as to why you're doing this. Because is it because of money? Is it because of control? Is it because you feel this needs to exist in the world? Like if you're not on the same page, there are going to be decision moments in your career of building this company where you're just not on the same page. So, and also like there are many ways of maybe getting to the objective that you're looking for. It might not be starting a business. So I would just say in general, it's a really good exercise to do. It's like, why do you want to start your own business? Because that may also be like your guiding compass for when stuff gets hard.
Two more questions. I know we're almost out of time. If you could call the young lady coming out of college before she strapped on the backpack and went around the world on her trip and tell her anything, what would you tell her?
I don't know. Let's keep. I haven't thought about this. I feel like it's so easy for me because 2020 hindsight, everything worked out kind of fine. So I just like, I don't know, keep doing what you're doing. Don't stress and like continue partying for a little while, maybe.
Yeah. Add on another year and a half to that trip.
Like it'll be fine. No, I don't. I honestly, I think it's hard to. I honestly don't know. I would say just you know what I would say probably like it took me like 15 years to get to that point. I would say just trust your gut. I think as I don't know if this is a gender thing, but I think most people are really in tune with like their gut. Like you're also, it's not that making a decision on a gut feeling is like a simplistic thing to do. It actually, your gut takes in way more data points than any analysis that you could consider. So
Good point.
It took me a long time before I was comfortable just making a decision based on how it felt. And when I now think back at it, because I felt I need to like provide supporting evidence and there needs to be an analytical or like a business decision behind it. And when I actually look back at my life, I've never said like, I wished I didn't make that gut decision. Like when I regretted decisions is when I didn't listen to my gut. So I wished I figured it out sooner and just be comfortable with being like, doesn't feel right, so don't want to do it.
That's good stuff. Last question. If you had to put Dama's core purpose into a sentence, and I asked you to push that, away from obviously your husband and two beautiful children. So aside from family being your core purpose is the point, how would you define it?
In one sense, it probably pay it forward. I think I'm like painfully aware of how privileged I am in like a lot of ways. So I feel like there's really this duty in me to like pay that privilege forward. Like it really upsets me when women in Western civilization say that they're not a feminist. I'm like, that's the luxury position that you can take. There are literally 80% of women in the world are living under massive depression. So for me, it's like, I think for me, my purpose always has been being really acutely aware of the privilege that I'm in and being dutiful and paying that forward to our younger generation or just in general people.
Beautiful, Dama. Love it. Beautiful. Thank you so much. You've been an awesome guest. I really appreciate you being on the Riderflex podcast. And by the way, congratulations on getting Manatee to where it's at. And it sounds like you're about ready to close a round of funding. Good for you.
Fingers crossed. Yes. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, Steve.
The Riderflex podcast features entrepreneurs, business executives, and the stories behind how they got there, as well as daily tips on career advice and job interviews. Our show can be heard just about anywhere these days, but you can visit riderflex.com and click on the podcast page to hear all the previous episodes and learn more about the recruiting and consulting services we provide. Contact us at the email address info@riderflex.com or 888-964-5876. Thanks so much for listening, and if you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like the episodes.